Hello, and welcome to another episode of Politics in Question. I'm Lee Drutman, a senior fellow at New America and a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University. And we are recording this on November 5th, the day after Election Day 2025, 1 year after America saw liberal democracy on the ballot and rejected it. That's my assessment, the assessment of many others. Perhaps our guest today, who has been thinking a lot about the rise of American autocracy and what to do about it. Our guest today is Stacey Abrams, who perhaps needs no introduction, but she's a novelist, a podcast host. Her podcast is Assembly Required, a strategist, and one of the leading thinkers and doers in the space of American democracy. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
All right, so let's start with last night. We're recording this on the day after Election Day 2025, and looks like voters kind of moved back towards democracy. Is that your assessment as well? There was sort of a rejection of Trump and Trumpism. Seems like it's one way to read the results from New Jersey and Virginia and some other statewide races, including in your home state of Georgia.
I think it's a both and. We saw on the macro level, you saw Virginia Democrats win not just the governor's race, but win sweeping majority in the state house. You saw in New Jersey, of course, winning legislative seats as well as winning the governor's race. But then you look at Proposition 50, which was much more a direct rebuke of the attacks on democracy through gerrymandering. And then you had Mondami's win in New York. You had Pennsylvania Democrats holding the Supreme Court. Maine rejected anti-voting measures that would have made it harder to cast your ballot. Here in Georgia, we flipped two statewide seats, which were both, I think, a rebuke of the Republican orthodoxy. But it was also about a conversation of what matters and proving that democracy can deliver, because our energy rates keep going up. And people were mad and they wanted to show up, and they showed up in record numbers. And then in Mississippi, which, got less attention, but because of a Section 2 voting rights case that was brought in Mississippi, they had to have special elections for the state legislature. And Democrats flipped three seats in the state Senate, breaking a supermajority for the first time in a decade. And they flipped a seat in the House. And so across the country, in very different spaces, we saw the macro rebuke of the micro rebuke of Trump, but you also saw, I think, a macro engagement of democracy as a tool. And that to me is very heartening.
Yeah. So let's back up to last year, same time this year. I think a lot of voters then were also concerned about the cost of living, inflation, the economy. And a lot of them chose to vote for Donald Trump. Now, I think I don't want to spend too much time relitigating the 2024 election, because that's been relitigated and relitigated. But I do want to wonder a little bit about how much you think voters were saying this is authoritarianism. Democrats have been warning us, but we don't care because prices are too high, or we just don't really know what that is because this is America and this is a democracy, or something else. Because you could tell a story where voters say, if this is democracy, I don't know, it doesn't pay the bills, so let's try something different. You could also tell a story. Voters say, well, I don't know, Democrats are constantly hysterical and lecturing us about autocracy. So I don't know, I can't even trust them anymore because what are they doing for us? They couldn't even pass a voting rights bill.
I think Americans are complicated people who are capable of remarkable capacity to hold multiple ideas. And so let's start with the big ones and then move into what it looks like on the ground. So as a macro issue, and I'm sorry I keep using macro, it's the word stuck in my head right now. But
it's a big ideas podcast, so we're gonna go macro and micro. Right? Zoom in and zoom out, right?
Exactly. So yes, the 2024 election was devastating, but we also misremembered the scale. Trump got 77 million votes. Harris got 75 million. Basically, the same number of voters who elected Zohran Mamdani yesterday, that's the same number of votes that created the difference between whether we were facing the assault on our rights that we face today or not. So we're talking about a 2 million vote gap, in fact, less than 2 million votes. And so I think part of the histrionics have been treating this as a mandate that it never was, but it was a warning. And I think the warning was to both sides. So for Democrats, the warning we should have taken from that election was that people are complicated and they need multiple things at the same time. You cannot only speak to economics without speaking to hope and opportunity. You cannot only speak to wanting things to be better when you then turn around and do the exact same thing. And what Republicans have faced is that they have this disastrous billionaire first agenda that is raising costs, and it's cutting healthcare, and it's starving children. And that was not what they put on the table either. What they promised was this, snake oil salesman idea that if you put us in charge, we'll fix everything overnight. And Americans have seen that that's not true either. And so the fight we're in right now is a fight about which destination do we have for this country. And what has been revealed in this election is that people know that something is not right. They're still not sure how to fix it, and they're still working on how to articulate it. But there was a clear rebuke across the country. In Bucks County, they were finally able to take back what they lost in 2021 in terms of Democrats overturning a Republican sweep. So people know something's not right. Our challenge, though, is to articulate what's wrong and what is possible. And I would say that what Republicans and what led by Trump have demonstrated is that for all of their economic populism, they don't care. And they have proven that day after day since they've been in office. But what Democrats have to prove, and what we are starting to demonstrate, is that not only do we care, but we understand that democracy and therefore Democrats have to deliver if we want people to believe that democracy is the route we want to take. If we want democracy instead of autocracy, we had all of these theoretical arguments in 2024. Now we have proof of concept. And I think what we saw last night was the beginning of rejecting the proof of concept of what is on offer by Republicans. But I don't want us to overread that we have won the fight on the other side.
Right. And I think that's important. We have been in the era of narrow margins for quite a while now. Right. I mean, and we're constantly in this pendulum period. In 2008, everybody says, "Oh, this is the new American majority, Obama," and a lot of us, including myself, were full of hope for the future. And then we swang in the other direction, and then we became deeply pessimistic. And then Democrats came back into power, unified majority in 2021, and then swing the other way. And meanwhile, as we've been swinging back and forth, there's just a growing share of Americans who just feel like, who are screaming in every poll that they can, that something is deeply, deeply wrong with our system. There's just a level of alienation and frustration that is pretty unprecedented in modern polling. And there's a lot of conversations about Democratic brand is crap, but the Republican brand is also in the sewer too. So how does any party break out of that? It feels like we're just trapped in this moment. We say we need a more positive vision, but what does that look like to you?
I think it's less about a positive vision and more about having a clear end destination. And we no longer share an end goal as a nation. We no longer have a shared belief that if you do all of the things you're told to do, that the outcome is going to be something that you want. And that is so essential in not just politics, but in democracy. Democracy is a construct. And Lee, you understand this. We're asking people to suspend their own arrogance and their need to win. And we're saying, look, I want you to share your power with someone you don't know that you might disagree with. Because if we do the shared power thing, if we contribute our resources and we negotiate through elections, we should all come out better on the other side. Autocracy, in contrast, says you don't get to have a say. We're going to decide what you get, and we're going to decide what the end goal is. And those two routes have been the two that we've been in debate about this year. But the challenge is that I think on the Democratic side, we are so deep in argument about who should decide where we go that we've forgotten to articulate where we're trying to get to. Republicans have been unequivocal. If you watch what's happened with the current regime, they have said they believe that this should be a Christian nationalist nation underpinned by an ethno-fascist approach, which is why the deportations that we're seeing are targeting Black and brown people, which is why they attacked DEI. They've been very unequivocal about the destination they have in mind and the route they want to take as autocracy. Democrats have to be just as deliberate about articulating what pluralism means, that it means that we all get to participate, that we all get to have access to opportunity, and that we reframe what an American dream looks like. But that cannot be done through platitude, and it cannot be done by arguing over who gets to be a part of America, who we're going to talk about today or not. And the extent to which we are having these marginal debates and not focusing on what people need and how we're going to deliver it, then we're going to continue to have this pendulum swing because people are waiting to know where we're trying to go. And so they're going to argue over which map do we use? Are we using Google? Are we using Waze? Are we going to use Apple Maps? But we got to tell people what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, but all those three maps at least have the same basic reality, right?
Exactly, and that's the thing. But the argument we're having is over the map and not the destination.
Yeah,
And that's why just this week we've seen a few different autopsies offering very different prescriptions for how Democrats should do better. And we can pull from every one of those autopsies some kernels of truth and some, I think, very facile rejections of the complexity of American society. And on the Republican side, they're going to have very banal and mean-spirited conversations about what is and what should not be. But if we want democracy to be sustainable, and this goes back to the reason for today's conversation, democracy has to deliver. It cannot be a concept. It has to be a proven set of deliverables that people can hold to and say, it is worth investing my faith, my trust, my vote, because the thing I'm going to get on the other side is going to make my life better. And for the last 20 years, that has not always been the case.
So just to be clear here, by deliver, you mean economic prosperity? Because I mean, there's two concepts that I think are in this conversation. One is democracy as sort of procedural pluralism, which is that like everybody has a say and we hash it out. And like, to me, if I think about the definition of democracy, it's a system of in which we have empathy for our fellow citizens and exactly what you said, that it's a system in which we can share power. But that's procedural, which is nice for liberals like me who like this kind of stuff. But I think there's a separate thing that you're getting at, which is just like a democracy that delivers is a democracy where people feel like they have a job that earns them a decent wage. They feel like they can afford health care and and a house and all those things. Is that is that what you're talking about?
It's both and. I live in a state that has made the procedure impossible as well.
Right.
When you live in a state where voter suppression is part of the narrative, you don't even get to have the argument about what you get because you don't get a chance to participate in how you get it. That's why we saw the state of Maine reject anti-voter legislation yesterday. That's why the Voting Rights Act, which has changed the future of the state of Mississippi in even a small way, is under threat. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge the procedure matters. And that's one of the reasons people are feeling uncertain and icky about what's happened. It's why California had to do Prop 50. Procedure matters. But the procedure is a means to the outcome because people don't want to think about process. You and I both know no one really cares to think about process. But you have to think about process as a way to unpack why you don't have the outcomes you need. And so, yes, people want economic security. They also want personal security. I live in one of the states that does not have bodily autonomy for women. My nieces and nephews are in the first generation to lose constitutional right, to lose civil rights since Reconstruction. And those things have been taken from them, and it changes how they make decisions and the lives they get to lead. It matters if you can go outside as someone who has black or brown skin or who speaks with an accent, knowing that ICE can kidnap you and deport you. And so I don't want us to be so reductive that we think it's only about the economics. It's got to be about the economics, but everything that those economics represent, which is the ability to live a good life. And that's ultimately what people want. And I think part of the tension we see is arguing over who gets to have that good life, who's responsible for helping make that good life possible, and which impediments exist that the government should remove and which impediments exist that the private sector should mitigate.
Yeah, I mean, these are it's the fundamental stuff of politics.
There you go.
So it's sort of a weird moment in our country in a lot of ways, but I think when you compare Trump to other authoritarians, and you write in this piece in Time magazine with Kim Lane Shepley that we can stop the rise of American autocracy, and absolutely we can. Sure hope so. And maybe in fact we are, because unlike Erdogan, or Orban or others, Trump is like very unpopular. And even the positions that you're describing as this white Christian national, like these positions are like overwhelmingly rejected by a supermajority of Americans. Like, yes, there are maybe 15 to 20% of this country who really think like we should be a white ethno-nationalist Christian state, and in which people who aren't Christian and aren't white are just like second and third class citizens. But I think I've looked at a lot of polls, and like Americans overwhelmingly reject that, and yet people vote for Republicans, and yet Trump is not popular. So how do we kind of wrestle with all of these tensions?
The first goal is to understand the reason I talk about both autocracy and authoritarianism. And Kim's framework matters so much because we are so focused on the autocrat, we're forgetting the authoritarian system that is supporting it.
Let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah. So autocracy is a singular person, a singular leader accruing and aggregating power. Authoritarianism is a broader system, still a small group, but they control the system by suppressing personal rights and personal freedoms and eliminating accountability. And so we have both autocracy and authoritarianism. But the extent to which we are myopically focused on Trump as the avatar, we are missing the Russell Vogt and Stephen Miller and J.D. Vances of it all. Because even if Trump isn't popular, if you keep electing people who support them, if you keep electing people who will send the National Guard into Democratic-led cities, if you send in judges, if you have and support judges who say we don't have the power and the authority to enforce what the White House wants to do, what Republicans want to do, so we're not going to. When the Speaker of the House refuses to seat a duly elected member and refuses to come back to work because he doesn't want to deal with the Epstein files, all of those pieces are part of the same authoritarian system. And so I would push back and say a little bit that Erdogan he was popular, but no one asked Erdogan, will you do everything you can to suppress the right to vote, to suppress the media? He never said that was what he was going to do. And then he got into office and did it. And he was able to deliver just enough that he has been able to maintain power, although, the fight over Ankara continues to sort of roil him a little bit. But I don't want us to be so focused on Trump that we ignore that they are building a superstructure for what they want next. And as long as we are electing the people who want that, that's when we're in trouble. And the way I like to think about it, you got a lot of people who believe in the Affordable Care Act. We're seeing this fight play out right now. But if you had asked them, do you agree with Obamacare? They would say, no, Obamacare is terrible, but I love the ACA. Well, in the voting mind, they will vote for people who say, I am pro-ACA, but I'm against Obamacare. And so you elect the very people who will decimate exactly what you want because they weren't lying. They were telling you what you needed to hear. And authoritarians are going to tell us what we need to hear. And we should not presume that the unpopularity of Trump means that the unpopularity will extend to everyone else who wants to accrue and hold this power.
Right. But I mean, the Republican Party is even less popular than Trump. So
they are, but they still have power. And
yes,
the problem with authoritarianism is that you dismantle the systems. And that's step 8. You destroy the systems that allow that power to be taken back. And yes, we are all excited about the elections that happened yesterday, but those are elections in largely blue states, with the exception of Mississippi. But those are also elections that happened before we have seen the full force and effect of the intended undermining of voting rights through the Calais decision, which is the voting rights case that's before the Supreme Court,
right.
which will decimate Black and brown representation in Congress and basically turn Congress into the Duma. It is not taking into account the fact that, Missouri and Texas have changed their structure. And while California did something good, California is not big enough to also overcome if it happens in Indiana and North Carolina. It also ignores the fact that this is an administration that is willing to use unhinged power to threaten the apparatus of voting, that the Dominion voting system that got so much money out of Fox is now owned by someone who agrees with and believes that the 2020 election was stolen. And so I think one of our challenges is that we cannot be so focused on one person that we ignore how the authoritarian system is being deepened. And that's why the 10 Steps campaign was launched. I want people to know what was wrong and be able to identify it, but also to start thinking about what do we do to win. And the elections are incredibly important, but they are one step out of many that we have to take if we want democracy to hold.
Right. So let's talk about some of those other steps that we need to take. And let's anchor. There's universities are starting to stand up to Trump a little bit. Some of them are capitulating. There have been a bunch of No Kings protests. Democrats have stood up and said, we're not going to fund this government, although we're going to make it about healthcare and not maybe the thing that it's really about. How is the resistance going? Or should we even be calling it resistance?
No, I think resistance is the right term. The Erica Chenoweth, Maria Stephan analysis of why civil resistance works, I think sits very neatly beside the analysis of what turns a nation into an authoritarian regime. And so, you break systems, you shut down the government so that people forget that the government should be able to do something. You pit people against each other, you scapegoat the marginalized. So we've seen them do all of the things. They've done all 10 steps. But we know that what resistance looks like, it's sharing good information. Yes, they're trying to break our understanding of the truth, but you have podcasters like us, but you also have influencers. You've got to tell people what the actual truth is so that people remember what they should be fighting for. You do the organizing and the mobilizing. That's what we're seeing happening right now around the SNAP benefits cuts and around federal workers who are now really starting to get desperate. When communities come together and organize, it feels small ball, but it's actually transformative because autocracy works when people think no one's coming to help. So when people show up, that reminds them of the fundamental value of democracy. But it's also the disruptive things. It is those protests, but it's also filming every single time you see ICE or HSI or whatever they call themselves today. When you see them violating rights, we've got to record what's happening. It's why Democracy Forward and the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund have to keep litigating. We've got to do all of the above. The way I like to talk about it is that we don't all have to do the same thing, but to hit that 3.5%, that 12 million people in sustained resistance that has been pretty predictive of being able to topple a regime, we don't have to do the same thing, but we all have to do something. And so we're only 10 months in. We're fairly new to this whole authoritarian thing. And it's taken a lot of folks a really long time to even acknowledge that we're there. And it's not universal that people believe that we are under an authoritarian regime, even in Congress, watching it in real time. And so part of our job is to make sure people understand and commit to believing this is where we are so they can commit to getting us out of it together.
So looking ahead to the 2026 election, there are various predictions about who will win, but also I think the more difficult question is, are these elections going to be free and fair, and what does it even mean to have free and fair elections? I'm curious how you think about the 2026
I
election.
think as of now, we will not have free and fair elections unless we work incredibly hard starting now.
And
And
what is unfree and unfair?
exactly. So there are three dimensions. It's, can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast a ballot? And does that ballot get counted? And we've traditionally seen that through the lens of the civil rights movement. But it's moved into a much more administrative process. And so we have seen states around the country try to limit and restrict how voter registration happens. Georgia just purged more than 470,000 voters ahead of the 2026 election, and you will see a rash of them doing so heading into 2026, especially if the Calais decision from the Supreme Court basically guts and decimates in total the Voting Rights Act, which means that states will make it harder and harder for people to register, and you will see more voting purges.
And also racial gerrymandering, too.
Exactly. And that's in the second one.
Yeah.
Can you cast a ballot? Well, it's not really casting a ballot if they have moved you into a district where they have ensured that your voice does not matter. And part of the racial gerrymandering that we're seeing in Texas and across the country is designed to say that even if you make it through the first hurdle and you're registered, we're going to make sure that the vote that you cast is meaningless because we've already decided whose votes matter. And then the third one, does the ballot get counted? Well, the Dominion machines are now owned by Liberty something. And you see this, you see the federal government through their election security protocol threaten to take money away unless they get access to state voter rolls. You have the head of CISA, saying that she doesn't really think it's her job to protect the right to vote in the ways that we have come to expect. And so you might get through the first two hurdles, but if the votes don't actually get counted, and the reason it doesn't get counted is because the federal entity responsible for oversight has essentially held hostage the states that do that work by denying them funding because they won't comply with authoritarian edicts, then you add those three things together and you do not have free and fair elections. Erdogan holds elections. Putin holds elections. Maduro holds elections. The act of having an election is no longer the marker. Is, do those elections actually matter? And in Africa right now, in Tanzania and some other nations, they're calling it democratic dictatorship, where you can go and vote, but you know from the minute you show up, that vote does not matter.
Well, it's depressing. So,
okay, here's what we can do about it. Okay,
right. That's the. This is where we want to end. Always end on a high note.
Okay, so I believe in making sure so it's recognize what the problem is, activate around it so you can build what you need. So now that we know, next year we need people who are volunteering to be poll workers, but who are also out there aggressively registering people to vote. It is harder and harder in most states to register voters because they are making it more difficult for the civil society groups to do that work. And so do it anyway. Get registered as a voter registrant. Make sure that you understand your community's laws. We don't have one national democracy. We've got 50 different democracies that do not necessarily align. And so make sure you're doing that work, volunteering. Invest in organizations that are doing voter protection and doing voting work. I personally love Fair Fight because it's one of the groups I helped start. But across the country, you've got amazing organizations who are doing this work. Number three, make sure that in between elections, we're actually having conversations with our neighbors. And it sounds small ball, but one of the best ways to ensure that voting isn't free and fair is when people don't expect voting to work. And so we've got to do the work of making sure folks know how elections, how they work. If you're listening to this podcast, you know more than most. So make sure you're sharing that knowledge, not in a didactic way that makes you sound smarter, but in an informational way, inviting people in. And then more than anything, we have to believe that we are entitled to a democracy that functions. We've got to lift up things that we see that are good so that people believe it's worth fighting for. And that's why I think that if we take these 10 steps together, we can win.
Yeah. And I just want to double click on number 3 about your neighbors. I feel like the sign of a healthy democracy is when people know their neighbors
Yes.
and that is, that it does feel very small ball when you say it, but when you amplify it and you think of people just being connected to each other, to their neighbors, to their communities. That is where power comes from, I think. And
Absolutely.
that's, I think, an incredibly important insight. So you heard it here first. American authoritarianism is not inevitable. There are things
It
we
is
can
not.
do about it. Thank you, Stacey Abrams, for joining us. What a
Hey,
pleasure.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.